It was about 10 years ago that, excuse me, I'm going to try to drink water. Blue water, it looks. It was about 10 years ago that financial literacy became sort of a big theme in Canada. We were in the middle of the global financial crisis in 2008-09, and the federal government of the day decided that part of the problem, part of the reason why the financial world was coming unglued was that people weren't making good money decisions. I would argue that it was the same was true in business and government, but regardless. They thought something needs to be done, so they struck a federal task force, and it went around the country. It was headed by a very serious man, Donald Stewart of Sun Life. They interviewed people all over the country for months, and they came up with some recommendations. They appointed a financial literacy point person who has since taken office, and she works tirelessly to promote financial literacy across the country. And here we are 10 years later, and I'm wondering how much progress we've actually made. I'm a journalist. I write about personal finance. If you don't know me, I'm Rob Carrick. I'm personal finance columnist for the Globe Mail. I've been doing that for over 20 years now. And I look at where we are financially, and I think I see some very positive signs, but I'm worried. I think we're at an inflection point for the economy. I think some of the same pressures that made the government worried about financial literacy in 08-09 are worse right now. I would argue that Canada, during the past 10 years, acted as if there was no financial crisis. We took the benefit of the low interest rates. We didn't learn the lessons that were taught to other countries that were worse off, like in the United States. And so where are we right now? If I were to do a personal finance / financial literacy report card, I'd struggle to give Canada a C. If I was a generous teacher in a good mood just ahead of summer holidays,
and that's not happening.
A C. I see personal debt levels rising ahead of income growth. I see income growth actually shrinking. We're at late stage in the economy. We should be seeing the best wage growth of this economic cycle. And what is happening? Wage growth is shrinking. So we're borrowing more, our wage increases are shrinking, we're probably just keeping up with inflation or slightly below. I see people making irrational decisions in the housing market, buying houses they cannot truly afford, while also meeting their other financial obligations for life. Those are the ones that worry me principally. I do see some good news too, though. I see more people are using tax-free savings accounts. And I just dug into some tax-free savings account statistics from a column I wrote for the Saturday paper, and I was really encouraged. There is much more activity saving money with tax-free savings accounts than there is pulling money out. TFSAs are working. They were a positive development. People are really taking advantage of them, and if you look at the use of them by age demographic, it's really good. Young people are making surprisingly avid use out of them. The use rises obviously as you're older and you have more cash to save, but it is even percolating down to 18 to 20-year-olds. Other positive things I see, the growing interest in exchange-traded funds, which is a very low-cost, fairly simple, transparent way to invest with wide applicability to all investors. I'm starting to get a lot more inquiries about financial planning. Individuals are starting to recognize that there is a separate aspect of planning that's separate and distinct from investing. The investing industry has done its best over the years to make you think that planning and investing are all the same thing. They're not. Growing realization from people that I have questions and I need answers. I need to consult an expert. I think the industry needs to improve itself, to prepare itself for this wave of interest. So there are a couple of good things. I think we are at an inflection point, though, and I think this discussion we're going to have today, I hope we can come up with some ideas about how to push the cause of financial literacy forward. Now, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves to you and to explain their vantage point on financial literacy. Let's start with Pattie right next to you.
Hi, I'm Pattie Lovett-Reid. I'm with CTV. I did know what he says. It is interesting to see what's going on in the world. Has anyone ever heard the dance floor and balcony analogy? Well, my husband used this one on me, and he, when you're on the dance floor and you're dancing, and you're right in the mood and you really think like you are the best dancer on the dance floor. And then you get the balcony view and you realize you are the absolute worst person on the dance floor. I think there's a little bit of that around financial literacy. I think people in many cases think they might be better off, that they might be more literate than they actually are. Because if you look at the last decade, and we've been in a very low interest rate environment, we've been managing, we've been coping. And sometimes, and I've been writing blogs on this, the day of reckoning is coming, and it hasn't come. And so it's a little bit like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, but the sky hasn't fallen. And so sometimes I think when we talk about the dire warnings around not saving enough for retirement, where we could spend a third of our life, having too much debt, having those expensive homes, and satisfying all those financial obligations, I think we have to come up with a better way to get that message across so you're not the worst dancer on the dance floor. I'll turn it over.
Ellen.
Love that analogy.
Ellen Roseman.
Ellen Roseman. I write for the Star on personal finance and lately much more on consumer issues and consumer advocacy. I think a lot of people don't have money to save because they make a lot of rash decisions in their everyday spending lives. So one of the issues that really gets to me is the preponderance of people getting in trouble because of sales pitches, online purchases, things that they just get caught up in the moment and they're really excited and they send off their money, or worse, they put down their credit card online without realizing, how a trap that can be. And then later on, after they've been burned, they write to me and they said, do you know about this company? And there is all the links showing that this is a terrible company. But nobody does that before they need to do it, which is usually after they have lost their money. So there's something about human emotions. I think we're just kind of excited, impulsive. We know what we need to do, but the emotions carry us away and we don't do it. And we can see that in the stock market where people sell or buy when they shouldn't. And no matter how much literacy you give people in terms of information, facts, and so on, you have to grapple with behavior. And the problem that behavior doesn't always change once they know what's good for them, unless they hit rock bottom, which is not where you want people to be.
Gary.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. One of the quick little story that I think speaks to one of the challenges that we in the media have in terms of financial education and literacy. I don't know whether many of you know Jean Lapierre. He was a Quebec, Montreal-based talk show host of politicians who died tragically in a plane crash about 2 years ago. He was on our board of directors, and we have a publication called Money and Youth. And just redone, by the way, and the website's just redone if you're interested. But he said, Gary, get 2 800 lines put on your phone. And I said, we have 6 lines already. He said, trust me, put 2 800 lines on your phone. So we did. And he went on air twice. And he said to people, this is a good book. It's not trying to sell you anything. You should get a copy for your kids. We had 60,000 phone calls in 2.5 weeks. You could not hang up the phone from 8 in the morning till 11 at night. And what it speaks to is there is an incredible desire, especially among parents, for their kids to have this. But there's a question of what do they know, who's trying to influence them, what's the messaging and whatever. And if there can be a validated source of trust, the interest and the willingness is explosive. And I think that's one of the things we have to help garner is a sense of trust in the information that is out there, because people do want this, and young people do want this. Second of all, and I think a role of the media, is we are talking with Health Canada about the recognition around the world of the growing association between the recognition of financial health and well-being and general and mental health and well-being. And when I spoke with the Director General at Health Canada, she said, you would not believe how finances and money come into the issues that we face. When it gets into stress, when it gets into all these situations, absenteeism, productivity in the workplace, crime in the workplace. We were contacted by an insurance company in the States interested in our Talk with Our Kids About Money program. And I asked them, why are you interested? Because your interest is in abuse of women. Number one reason women stay in abusive relationships is financial. We want moms to talk with their kids, learn about money so they're less likely to stay in an abusive relationship. We need to get word out to parents that we're not talking just about numbers and picking the right credit card. We're talking about building a healthy, less stressful, more mentally healthy, more positive feeling life for your kids. And I think in that way we'd get much more advocacy for parents for what needs to happen in our schools. And the last point I'll make in the opening is that in terms of what was discussed in that opening session in there, the changes going on in the world of work. We start our financial education with getting money. Often it starts with you got it, what you're gonna do with it, you're gonna save it, invest it, give it away, whatever. But the first and foremost challenge is getting money. And the changing workplace there and the challenge that puts on our educators to share the information with kids about that change and affecting their education and career choices is very, very difficult. I mean, I talk at a men's group or whatever about change in the workplace that goes on, and you should hear about the pace of transition. There's no hope an educator is going to be able to stay on top of that. And we've got to find some way to help educators inform our kids of what jobs are disappearing, what jobs are being created, what skills are being valued, because their challenge of getting money before you have to worry about what you're going to do with it is going to become extraordinary, because we have kids making traditional, long-term, past choices that is not going to prepare them well for the future. And there could be a few other things, but that's probably good for them.
All right, thanks everybody for the introductory remarks. I'd like to start off talking about what the media's role is in financial literacy. You know, are we, is it a duty? Is it a public service? Is it good content that our readers want to read? Are we covering it as news? How do you approach it?
Well, I come from a different vantage point because I was an executive with TD and I was their spokesperson for wealth management. I was part of the regime that went out with the scare tactics that you're not saving enough, and as a result, you're going to have a horrible retirement unless you come to me and I'll help you figure it out. And so that was my corporate hat. Then I moved into the media, but I'm also a certified financial planner, and I've maintained that designation because I want to cross the line of saying, here are the facts and here's the story, because I also want to take it a step further and say, here are the recommendations. And I felt it was important for me to have the credentials to say, I've worked in this industry, I've helped people, you have to develop a plan. Because the story isn't going to be a plan. We can tell you that this poll came out from this financial institution, and here's what 58% say that they are, they have their mental health affected by the fact that they're not sleeping at night, and the list go on and on. And so that's where I try to cross the line in terms of taking the data that people will present and trying to come up with some sort of solution. I try to write blogs. I write blogs every day, not as in-depth. I'm trying to do bite-sized, usable pieces. And I often reference you because your data is rock solid. And by the way, does anyone have an iPhone? I'm just saying. I did not bring mine, and if I don't get a picture of my rock stars for my Instagram, I'm gonna be really upset. So somebody take a decent picture, okay, please? Anyway, but my point is, data is so important, but it's what we do with the data is what I'm thinking.
Ellen, what about you? You've been writing about personal finance longer than I have. In fact, Ellen was my boss when I started at the Globe and Mail, way back when. What is your role? What's your mission?
Early 70s, so it's a long time, and I haven't retired because there's still so many stories out there, and people keep saying, we hope you never retire, so keep going, and I love it. But what I think is important, well, way back in the 70s before anybody talked about financial literacy, is just the fact that this is our everyday lives. This is important stuff. The newspapers were full of what was happening in Ottawa and at the UN and internationally, and often bad news. People are interested in things that affect their lives in a good way. So it's news you can use, which sounds terrible, but it's just trying to help people get a better handle on things that are important to them. So it's always well read. People are interested in it. The Globe and Mail, where I used to work, had me once a month touch base with, I think, about 7 families at the same time that the inflation statistics were coming out. Remember, inflation was growing like crazy. And they were families at all different levels of economic status. And I'd be talking to them about what kind of food they were buying and were they cutting back and what was happening with their loans and so on. And those stories were great, and people read them. Sometimes people read these things, and Rob knows too, those financial face lists are often just, these people are crazy and I can't relate to them at all, or I'm much better than they are. There's a lot of that going on. But in the media, I think our role is to help people understand what's going on through the use of anecdotes, stories, real people. Industry, people don't do that. They can't really do that, or if they do, you don't trust it because they're ads. They're silly ads, slice of life kind of things. So we're trying to help people through ways that they can understand and with tips, because they can get tips. Now, frustratingly is that it takes a lot of repetition to get the message across. Advertisers have the benefit of that, we don't, and sometimes our editors will say, you wrote about that already, or you wrote about that many times before. You have to keep finding new ways to write about it because people don't really get the message until it's pounded at them a number of times in a number of different ways.
If I can just add, or until it hurts enough.
Yeah.
When you hurt enough, when you are at rock bottom and you realize you don't have enough to make that next payment, that's often when people will reach out and say, I think you wrote something on this, or I need help on that.
Or when someone they know is in that position.
Or,
and then
yeah, it's
they're trying
always
to help
someone
them.
who knows.
Yeah, right. Well, it often is. It's sometimes our kids.
Gary?
Yeah, Rob, I think one of the challenges we have, I think, with the media, and it speaks to your little story with your new employer. There was a financial literacy insert in the Toronto Star. I don't know how many saw it last week. I had the same response at my board meeting. We have about 24 board members, and I said, did you see, our article was the front of the insert into the Toronto Star. And I said, you probably saw that we were a front page on the insert in the Toronto Star. How many of you read the Toronto Star? Not a one. Part of the problem we need is the media to make sure they effectively engage with the people we're trying to reach, so that when we get the media doing something, we're actually getting the message to them. We have that challenge particularly with the younger generation, who are getting their news from other sources and who is a prime group that we want to try and educate. So part of the challenge for the media is how do I keep and expand the engagement of the audiences that we're trying to influence. I think historically the media has seen its role as to inform and opine on things like that. I honestly believe in the challenges we face today, it does need to take on the role of education. I know that Philip Crawley, who's the publisher of the Globe, feels very strongly that the Globe should have an education function. I believe it would be great if a paper like the Globe would do an expose of a 6-part series on the challenges our educators are facing today in the world of dramatic change, in an education world that changes so slowly. What in heaven's name are we going to, we work with the provinces in curriculum change. Alberta was 4 years into curriculum when the government changed. They're now 5 years into curriculum. You got 9 years before you're gonna, and I'm sorry, the rate of world change versus the challenge of educators to keep in touch is extraordinary. And I think therefore that some of that has to be deferred to knowledgeable people in the media who have and who are validated, because one of the we do the classroom edition of the Globe and Mail. We're starting to incorporate media literacy as one of the educational components of that to help young people be able to assess sources. Is it a credible one? Is it not? And whatever. So I think that's an important function too. And I think the other way the media can really help is we have a lot of times educators who are fairly, there's a lot of similarity among educators, educating very diverse groups. We have seen, we're right now trying to work with Indigenous Canadians. And when you see the cultural differences of us trying to educate those in the Indigenous, we're in a cultural chasm that we need help reaching them. You see people, in some cases we're educating, and the needs of those with less income are often dramatically different than those with reasonable or high income. In fact, the advice you give to them can be wrong based on what you do, and we need help diversifying the messages to people who live in different economic strata. So we have cultural variations, we have economic variations, and we have generational issues where the millennials, in many cases, have all different kinds of goals and whatever, and old fogies like me are out there trying to educate the millennials based on historic notions of what goals, ambitions, getting a home, buying a... I used to care about the car that I would buy. These kids don't care a hoot. Give me a zip car, give me the subway, doesn't matter. I needed a nice red car, Javelin 72. It was, it just is all different. And somehow I think the media can also help us try and bridge those gaps between those who are wanting to educate and the diversity of those who are being educated.
I would like to add a point here, and that is that the media is open, from my perspective, to doing this, but we have a little problem. That is getting the readership to engage.
Yeah.
Now, if I wanted to put a story on the Globe's website and make sure nobody read it, I would make sure the phrase financial literacy is in the headline.
Or securities regulators.
Oh, yeah, that's a good
That's
one.
my second choice. You know what? It will die a unread death if I write something with that term in it. You have to be crafty and clever about how you present this. You have to get down to ground level and explain it to people how it's relevant to their lives. You can't just shovel out content and think, we've put it in the paper and that's tick, that's done. People will be more financial literacy. They won't read it, they won't see it. To Gary's point about the special section, we've got to be a lot more creative in how we put this out, because it's like food that's good for you. People don't gravitate towards it. Now, I want to talk about a more positive angle on this.
I like broccoli.
Me too.
I can't stand it.
Did you hear they have a bucket broccoli in one of the provinces trying to get people to, instead of the bucket beer in Ontario?
There's something to be said about that though. That there is. Anyway, it won't work for you, but fair enough.
Speaking of working, I want to know what works for all of you and what doesn't work when you're trying to reach people and get the financial literacy message out. I mean, I was just talking about how hard it is to get people to engage. Pattie, what do you find works for you and what is unproductive?
Well, I wrote the same article and put two different headlines on it. One was estate planning, what you need to know. I thought that was pretty, insightful. And then I wrote a different headline, you don't want to die the richest person in the graveyard.
Whoa.
Right? And so that meant people could spend some money that they didn't have to keep on saving. And it got picked up. I actually think it got picked up by you somehow, because all of a sudden I got all this readership and I saw your name somewhere. So somehow I think you had something to do with it. But my point is, I think you're right about the headline. The content is the content. I also think about exercising. When you say you have to exercise because you're going to have a longer life and a better quality life, people go, I don't have time to do it. I know I need to. So I think the same thing around financial literacy. We know we need to. It's not that people don't get it. I did not go to university. I dropped math in grade 9. Not maybe, but you know what I'm saying. So if I can get financial literacy, the average person in Canada can. So there's got to be a way to engage people to say, it's important to me. Knowledge is power. And when I have some knowledge, I have some confidence. And so everything I try to do creates an element in my mind to try to say, here's a little bit of knowledge that might make you more confident to allow you to make the decisions in life that allow you to do whatever you want to do, but it's not about the money. So I guess I always try to go about it without it being about the money. So when you don't want to die the richest person in the graveyard, guess what? You get to spend a little, but you don't get to spend it if you don't have it. And then I go from there, because I got you.
It's sometimes hard to tell whether people are reading the story or not. You can see the clicks, but that doesn't mean they've gotten through it or they've absorbed it. But I work in a lot of different areas. So I developed a course with 2 government agencies called Financial Basics. And I give it, used to be twice a year, now once a year at Ryerson, and it's free. So there's 100 seats, and it tends to be, maybe half full. And when I talk to the people, I find out who's going. A lot of them are already financially literate, and they just want more tips. They're just incrementally, they're really interested and they want a few more tips. And it's hard to get those people, because the people who really, really need it, because there's all these attitudes of fear, shame, guilt, judgment. They're intimidated, maybe it's gonna be too mathematical, they're just gonna feel guilty. I have a really good friend who, like many people, feels that she's bad with money. So she said, come to your seminar, it's 4 hours, so it's quite long. And the first couple of hours are about saving money and using credit. And the second part are about financial planning and investing. So she loved the first couple of hours, but she left at intermission and she said, I can't stay because I'm just bad with money. So she just didn't want to listen. And that's what you get, right? How do you get beyond that? You can put on all these great headlines. I think in the media, often what you need is one really kind of strong key message, not a whole lot of stuff, like save more, spend less. That's really boring. But I think of one where the CRA, and they're continuing to do that, it's not them. The scammers who are calling you and pretending to be the CRA and harassing you and extorting you and sending. So I wrote a couple of stories like that, but then a guy wrote and he says, I'm a victim. And as soon as you get inside the head of a victim and you write a story about, why did he succumb to this? And why would he send money, as the scammer told him, through 12 different MoneyGram outlets in the US to the Canadian government. He said, well, they said we're so busy in Canada, we have to do it this way. And the key was that he had emigrated here from Russia a number of years ago, but he just brought his new wife over. And they were threatening that she might have to be deported back there because of this tax debt. He didn't do his own taxes, he had an accountant doing it. They caught him on a weekend. And they just kept him on the phone until his fear got to him. And he did this, $50,000, sending it off to the US. And he was really embarrassed by it. And then they called a few days later and said, okay, you've caught up on your past debt, but now we have a new one for you. And that was the end of it. And then he decided to call the media.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, to your point, Rob, in terms of the headline, I don't think we'll get people to read it till they think it really matters. And that's why I have a lot of hopes for this association with health and general mental health and well-being. We were talking to the Health Canada about doing a public awareness campaign to try and help Canadians better understand that correlation, so there is a greater understanding of why it's important. Until they see it's important, we've got to use all these techniques and tricks and whatever to get attention, whereas if they really understood its value, I think they would be more inclined to read. The other thing we find is success is participation, getting people actively involved in the learning rather than simply one-directional learning. The other thing is stats and data. When I do a workshop for teachers and you spend about 15 slides on stats of the situation, they are hook, line, and sinker caught by them. My God, we didn't know it was like that. And so I think if people knew the real story, which is an interesting story to tell with stats and data, that can motivate people to want to learn more too, because it gives them a better understanding of the problem.
But if they're not teachers, stats and data usually
Yeah,
turn them off.
I do that.
Stats and data.
Well, I'm not, I mean, if you start talking about debt to, income and
ratios?
things like that.
That
interest,
excites
but-
you.
I'm saying if you start to use some of these information pieces about the fact that the largest growing company in Canada was a check cashing payday loan operation, and the growth rate was 470%, and those kinds of things to show where Canadians are going to get their money and whatever, it's
That's a
wow.
story.
The other thing we find is with all this desire to migrate to the internet, face-to-face is so much more effective in engaging people in this, because simultaneous with the other point is to listen to where people are at and what they want to know. We're so anxious at times to tell them what we think they know, you don't get the starting point of where they're at and what they really want to know about, and the face-to-face really helps that too. The other thing is humor. We actually just finished completing a series with Just for Laughs Gags called Money Laughs, and it's 10 vignettes, a minute and a half long, creating a humorous scenario in the Just for Laughs Gags format, and then we put about 6 or 7 tips at the end related to that scenario. I think it's going to be great because it's for social media, you can get around, and people can have a chuckle before they get into actually learning, because we find that humor, of course, is the most, I think, effective engaging tool.
Those online?
Yeah, at moneylaughs.ca or .com. So moneylaughs.com.
Nice.
I have a stat that will make Gary's point about getting your attention about financial literacy. I was talking to a venture capitalist the other day, and he told me that by far the most common type of fintech company starting up in Canada today is involved in lending, which means high interest rate lending. So that's when you hear about people saying that financial technology or fintech is going to help with financial literacy, that's who's doing it, high rate lenders. All the more reason for us to get our stuff together and get it right.
Quick question for you, Rob. I don't know if people know, but the highest legal interest rate you could charge until possibly recently was, anybody? 60%, right? You could charge that legally as a 60% interest rate. Plus a lot of the payday lending ones would compound it because you'd borrow money to pay back your loan, and you'd borrow money to pay back your loan, and some poor folks got into 360 annualized interest rates on the debts they were paying. But there was a bill before the House that was, I think, bringing it down to 30. Do you know?
I don't know where that is, but I do know that they have found clever ways around that. For instance, if you want to borrow from one company, you have to sign up for their credit monitoring service. So that's an extra add-on to your interest charge, which effectively raises the interest rate beyond what might be legally required.
They've turned it all into service charges, so they don't define it as interest. And it's weekly regulated. The federal government and the provinces fought about it for 10 years, and the provinces finally did it. But they're not that tough on these guys either.
You know, I think it's one of those things too. We have 4 adult children, and they're all in their 30s. They all have mortgages, they all have their own homes, and they didn't ask for help financially. and they didn't need it. So needless to say, they grew up in a household that we probably talked about money ad nauseum. Like when they would date, you wouldn't want to bring them home for dinner because I'd say, how industrious are you? And where do you see your future? And just what is your debt to income ratio right now? And that was a typical dinner conversation. You think I'm kidding, like I wish I, geez. But I will say, this past weekend, I had an interesting conversation with our son who is married. They have a 3-month-old. And he said, I'm not paying down my mortgage. My husband had to kick me under the table. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, it's such a ridiculously low interest rate environment. And I get that, you know, we often, where do you get your biggest bang for your buck? Do you get it going into the markets, or do you get it paying down your mortgage? It's about advancing your net worth. I understand all of that. But still, I have an old mentality, you get rid of debt. You just get rid of debt, even though it's a legitimate strategy. I get it. But what it became crystal clear in talking to 4 adults who manage their own money, and quite frankly, I want them to, they are talking a different language completely than I'm talking. And so I asked the panel this because I walked away thinking terminology has changed, how they open up their accounts, how they access debt, what they're looking for is very different. And granted, all of them have only ever been in a relatively low interest rate environment. And I will throw out that they had parents that paid for their university education. And I say that because then they didn't have that debt situation. So they were able to save, they were able to do other things, and that was a strategy on our part. But do you think that the millennial today that we're often talking about is really looking for something very different than all of us are up here talking about? And the teacher, and those in the education system?
I think there's, without a doubt, generational differences in that regard, but I think one of the most important things is to actually have the conversation. Because when you talk about trust, the one group that young people do trust are parents. And that discussion, we have...
Really? Well, I'll have to throw that out in the next conversation.
We have another program called TalkWithOurKidsAboutMoney.com, which is a whole site for parents on talking with your kids about money, because you don't necessarily have to know all the information. Right? And the goals and whatever can be different, but you can encourage them and promote them to learn. You can help them find sources. You can become an aid to their education. You can get them to assign some priority for why it's important in their lives. There's all these ways in which a parent, even though we have so many parents who say, I was so bad with money, what am I going to do teach my kids about money? Right? But the reality is that you've learned a lot about money in the process of the mistakes you made, that you can help your kids not make those mistakes. But I think encouraging, we got teachers here who can make a huge difference, but parents can make a huge difference too. And even though they don't feel confident at times in what they know for what their kids need to know, you can become an aid to their education, promote it, encourage them. You should go here, you know, you should be, I've heard about this that you should be talking about. And I think the more that parents can get engaged that way as a trusted source in all this world of questionable trust, they can really be helpful to their kids.
I want to talk about the challenges of financial literacy, of promoting it and teaching it. And I'm thinking in 2 tracks here. 1, behavioral, and 2, economic. I mean, I can throw out an economic challenge right now, low interest rates. Basically, the Bank of Canada hammered interest rates lower and told the country, go buy stuff to get the economy going. And we all listened. Behavioral, I mean, I see social media as a big problem, this whole fear of missing out phenomena, but in your own work, what do you find are the challenges? What are the blocking points?
I always feel badly going first. You want to go first?
Okay. As well as writing in the media, I teach a course called Investing for Beginners at University of Toronto. And it's 8 weeks, and I find, I've been doing this for about 10 years, the investing scene has gotten more and more complicated. And you know, you did robo-advisors, there's like 15, and you rated them on 20 different criteria. And it's really hard to even get into all these distinctions. And the industry makes things more and more complex. And I know that I'm losing people. I can see that they're just glazing over at a certain point. And then the other thing is that even if you teach them stuff, like at the beginning, the main message was mutual funds are too expensive. There are better ways to invest, such as exchange-traded funds or index funds. So people would understand that. But the exchange-traded funds started to grow, and the only way that you could buy them was to go to a discount broker, open an account, start making your own decisions, pushing the buttons. I saw a cartoon once of a guy like this, you know, he was in front of his computer and is afraid to push the button because it's like a major decision. So we had to wait until these robo-advisor firms came along. and they're by no means a mass market thing, but they took all the hard work out of it and made it really simple and allowed you to do it on your phone. So even though we're teaching people, they can't really proceed unless the industry moves a certain way. And like I'm saying, the attitude of, you know, I can't do this, or the attitude of, I hate this, I'll hire somebody to do it for me. And then once they do that, they often say, it's that person's responsibility, I'm not even gonna open my mail, I'm not gonna check it, especially when the markets go down. I don't wanna know about this, let them handle it. And that's a terrible attitude because they can take all kinds of advantage of you as a customer. So you have to stay actively involved. And for many people, that's not the most exciting thing. I'm sure you're saying, you know, have a one day a week or a day a month where a couple sits down and talks about their money. There's so many other things you want to do besides that. So it's sort of pushing people to do things that they find very, very unpleasant. And we have to at least say, as Gary says, maybe what the consequences will be if you don't do it.
Yeah, a bit of a circuitous route to answer your question. I was part of a delegation that went to the UK to study workplace training, because Canada does not have a particularly good record of workplace training. We went to the brand new global BMW training plant just outside London. Absolutely incredible facility with a golf course, whatever. We all wanted to apply to work for BMW before we left. But at the end of it, we got a chance to talk to the head of the institute there, and we said, what are you looking for? We saw these young people in lab coats, all working on engines and cars. What are you looking for in the young people that you bring into this institute? He said, 10% of what they know and 90% of who they are. We can't build the kid, but we can train the kid. And I think the challenge for us right now is the recognition, not only in financial education, but in education in general. There's a recognition that we need to flip curriculum documents around. You all read the preambles about working as a team, communication skills, being able to write in an articulate fashion, and then we have all this massive amount of outcomes that all the teachers spend all their time focusing on because you got to cover, and that upfront stuff, when we had time. The reality is you got to take that and make that the curriculum, and you got to use the content to be able to teach those skills. And part of the problem, we have an annual meeting of curriculum directors. And they hadn't met in 20 years till we brought them together, but we figured the people who control what's taught in the classroom should probably meet every now and then. And when we did, they recognized this. The challenge of changing it is extraordinary. There was a session I went to in Banff with a guy from Australia who knew that this was being tried in Alberta. He said, watch out. We tried it in Australia. Went through, made all the changes. Implementation time came. Parents didn't understand it, they spoke out against it, the politicians screamed, and they shut it all down. And he said, educate the parents, because if you're going to change the process of education, every parent thinks they know what education should be, yet educators are recognizing the way education should be. But the challenge of reconciling that change is hugely difficult. The other thing on the behavioral side of it is that behavior change takes time. And I'm going to give a shout out to Scotiabank, one of our largest supporters, because they recognize that we can't give numbers every 6 months, every 12 months, whatever, on the impact of what we're doing, because what we're trying to change here is going to take time. And we have a lot of funders who balk at that. And where's the measurement? Where are the metrics? What are you measuring now? I'm sorry, give me about 10 years, 12 years, we'll be able to see whether the behavioral seeds that we planted have actually borne fruit. And that's really one of the challenges, because we need the financial support to support educators in what they're doing. But if they're wanting regular, updated, short-term metrics on behavioral change, we're not going to be able to do it.
Well, I was just going to pick up on the behavioral side, and I'll do something by way of an illustration. I was in the car driving, and our son David called me, and he said, and I'm on the 401 at the time, Mom, I have the worst news ever. That's not what you want to hear on the 401. And he said, I owe $1,800 to CRA in my taxes. Okay, that's not the worst news ever a mother could hear. And so I paused for a minute, and then he said very quickly, and he's in his 20s, late 20s, how did you let this happen to me? And so behavior, I said, well, let's back up, boyfriend. You know what? This is your account. You work, and you know the example as a mom, and you're going through that. And I said, so what are you going to do about it? And he said, well, isn't it a week? And I said, no, I don't owe CRA. You owe CRA. And the behavior was, I will come for dinner, and we will sit down, and we can talk about some of the plan and how you're going to get around it. And I'd like you to believe that that was the defining aha moment until last year. And I get a call from David, and he's saying, all right, you know, I'm gonna owe money, and I know I am, and I'm not sure I'm up to date on RSP, da 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 da. And so so first what does he do? He texts me, then he emails me, then he direct messaged me on Instagram, because I'd probably find it there first. And then he went through all of these, and he said, this is an emergency. And I will say, this year, I'm not getting a call from David. I know he's on top of it. I know he's figured it out. I know he's 32. So, and he's grown up understanding this. So behavior takes time, but I think there is an ownership that we have to push back a little and say, this is your problem, but we are resources to help you get through it. But not necessarily, I believe in a little bit of tough love through this. And there's no economic outpatient gonna happen. I'm not paying CRA, no.
This feeds into my next question, which is how do we measure the results? Gary, you say we don't have, it doesn't lend itself to short-term, to
Behavioral aspect, yeah.
on
Yeah.
behavioral. But what about, how do we measure it? Both, I mean, I'm thinking both in terms of what you do day to day. How do you measure whether that's getting through to you, but also in the economy? What indicators do you look at to say, okay, you know what, that's an improvement on financial literacy, and I can see it clearly in this trend?
Yeah, well, one of the things, obviously, we look at bankruptcies here in Canada, and the fact is we aren't seeing it. So there's one narrative that would suggest that, well, we have a lot of debt, but we're really managing that debt. But we also have been in this consistently low interest rate environment, and so I would argue that as rates start to go higher, so will the bankruptcy proceedings go up higher, and so that's going to be one basic measurement. You know, I think it's the type of questions that are being asked of me, and I do get emails, texts all the time as you do, and you can see they're taking on a different form. They are, is it A or B that I do? Do I, like, which is the best course of action? And I think people are now starting to realize that as the economy gets better, inflation ticking up, things are getting a little more expensive. There isn't as much disposable income. So given the fact that it is so little and wages are not growing, that's one of the measurements that I'm looking at. But I do think we're gonna see this shift where we've watched debt to income continue to consistently rise, and I think once we start to see it come down, that's a big one I watch.
Ellen, results, how do you measure them?
One of the interesting things is credit report and credit score.
Mhm.
Rob and I were on a panel together once. In our writing, we talk about you gotta check it, and it's it's free for the credit report, and you gotta pay for the credit score. And the credit bureaus are really bad at trying to help you do it, and usually they're trying to hook you onto monthly monitoring services. So customers are skeptical about it, and a lot of them don't bother after one attempt. But lately, now, the banks are doing it for free. This is great, and a number of other services which are trying to get some money from you through switches and so on, like Credit Karma, they're out there too, or Borrowell. But it's much more easy now to get a free credit score, and I think TransUnion now offers a free online credit report without charging for it, because you used to always have to get it in the mail. So a lot of it is not what we say, but the effect of what we're writing, encouraging businesses to get involved and to do things that are in the benefit of the customer. And we can tell, I certainly can tell when you hit a nerve and people are writing about it, so you write more about it, and eventually somebody starts to say, there might be a business opportunity, or the government says, time for us to change the rules, and then we can keep writing about it. So in Canada, what I find is that people are fairly complacent, and they don't get angry quickly, and when they do get angry, they grumble more and complain to their friends and neighbors. So to get them to rise up and really get angry, this is great, and it doesn't happen a lot, but in the media, we're there to help encourage that, and every once in a while when it does happen, we can actually get change done.
Yeah, one of the things I think I'd like to see, if we could, Robin, and it'd be great if the Globe, the Star, whatever. In fact, a number of years ago, we put together a sample list of macro indicators in the economy, that probably about 12, 15, that you could monitor, and be it the savings rate, be it outstanding debt on credit cards, people who pay off their credit cards, outstanding balances on credit cards. There's a whole bunch of stats if you related to them to what our fundamental goals are and our hopes of behavioral change, if we were successful in behavioral change, how would people act differently? Which would be the formative question to ask. What would we like to see as differences if we are successful in what it is we're trying to do? And then look at the macro indicators across society that we might be able to measure to see whether in fact we're achieving success or not. We're never going to be able to know on an individual household basis. I mean, it's where our care and concern should be, but we're never going to be able to measure that. But we could get some measurement in that regard. The other area we're looking for success is in curriculum. And I'm happy to say that they're, as slow as it is, there's Quebec has put a compulsory financial literacy program in place in their schools. We just signed an MOU with the province of Manitoba to design, write for them, a high school course in financial education. Saskatchewan has just asked us to review 2 high school courses in financial education. Alberta is integrating it into their new curriculum change. BC has integrated it through K-12 in their new curriculum change. PEI has a new grade 10 program. Nova Scotia has a grade 9 unit. Ontario, I think, will finally have a compulsory grade 10 component of, in a quarter of it, starting September of next year. There is a recognition among the provinces, which is so important in terms of reaching kids in school, that this is important. We've got to do something. The biggest challenge by far is training teachers and making sure that teachers have the confidence and capability and tools to be able to implement it, because they haven't been trained in this subject in the past. The opportunity is going to be there for us to take advantage. That's where we really got to support them.
Thanks, Gary. That's all the time we have. So let me just thank the panelists, Pattie, Ellen, and Gary, for what I thought was an excellent conversation. And I think we really had a chance to dig into this a little bit more, get beyond the cliches. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't know, did we get a good photo?
Yeah.
Smile.
Send it to us all. Greg, did we get good photos?
Okay, I'll throw it out there, patricia.lovett-reid, if anyone has it, at bellmedia.ca. Seriously, I would really like it. You can follow me on Instagram too.